Now with the Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. Secretary Mayorkas, thank you for joining us this morning. We just heard Pierre Thomas describe this as a witch's brew moment. Do you agree?
It's something that we've been discussing publicly for quite some time, George. We have a heightened threat environment, as Director Wray and the Attorney General both articulated, and we've been saying this for quite a number of months. We have not only the persistent threat of foreign terrorism that, of course, created the Department of Homeland Security, but we have adverse nation states. And for the past 10 years, we've seen a significant increase in what we term homegrown violent extremism. It is a very difficult threat landscape, and it is why that we as a community, not just the federal government, but state and local officials and residents need to be alert to it and take the precautions necessary to avoid violence from occurring.
So what precautions are being taken ahead of this series of events that I've outlined and discussed with Pierre?
I think the successful conclusion of the Sugar Bowl is a powerful example of a response to a tragedy and precautionary measures taken in its wake. We deployed additional personnel. We worked very closely with public officials and law enforcement in New Orleans to make sure the Sugar Bowl proceeded accordingly. We took additional sweeping measures and screening measures. So we took a host of actions to supplement that which already was in place. And we are proceeding accordingly with respect to tomorrow, the certification of the election, the state funeral of former President Jimmy Carter, the inauguration of President-elect Trump, and continuing thereon.
Are you seeing any specific threats, or is it just an overall concern?
It is an overall concern, and when we identify a specific threat, we in law enforcement respond very quickly to it. In that regard, as we continue to grieve for the victims of the terrorist attack in New Orleans, we also have to take stock of a brief moment of footage that we saw when law enforcement on the scene were notified of the attack, how they ran towards danger. That is a powerful example of what our frontline personnel in law enforcement and the first responder community do each and every day across this country.
Well, one of the things we saw in the wake of the New Orleans attack, former President Trump immediately went on True Social and talked about open border policy leading in some ways, suggested it led in some ways to this event, echoed by something that the new Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, also said on Thursday of this week. I want to play that.
The Biden administration has been completely derelict in its duty. The congressional Republicans, we here in the House and the Senate, have repeatedly asked the DHS under the Biden administration about the correlation, the obvious concern about terrorism and the wide open border. The idea that dangerous people were coming here in droves and setting up potentially terrorist cells around the country. We have been ringing the alarms.
Of course, the perpetrator is an American citizen raised in Texas, but how do you respond to that overall argument?
George, let me repeat what you said. The assailant who perpetrated the terrorist attack in New Orleans was born in the United States, raised in the United States, and served in our armed forces. It is not an issue of the border. With respect to the border, our highest responsibility, and one that we work to fulfill each and every day throughout the Department of Homeland Security, throughout the federal government, is the safety and security of the American people. That is what we have incredibly talented and dedicated individuals doing every day in their careers.
You mentioned the possibility of foreign actors as well. What impact has the fall of the Assad regime in Syria had on the threat environment here at home?
We're very concerned about the instability that has resulted from that, and whether, in fact, it creates some space for the reemergence of ISIS in Syria. And ISIS continues to seek to radicalize individuals outside of the Middle East and throughout the world, and that is something that we are, of course, also very focused on. And John Cohen, the expert, you had earlier, with whom I have worked very closely for many years, correctly spoke of.
Let me also ask you about this issue of extremism inside the military, radicalization of service members and former service members. The former President Trump's nominee for Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, has called this issue of extremism in the military a sham, suggested that perhaps some of the efforts to combat extremism are going to end. What's your response?
I would say this, George, the phenomenon of radicalization of individuals is not limited to the military. It is something that we are very focused upon in society writ large. The military is not immune to it, nor is the federal workforce, but this is something that we have to address as a community, not politicize, but rather be united in confronting and combating.
There's always a concern that bad actors are going to try to exploit times of transition in order to attack. What kind of coordination have you had with Governor Kristi Noem, who's been nominated to be your successor as Homeland Security Secretary, particularly as we focus on the inauguration?
I have spoken with Governor Noem a number of times, including on New Year's Day and immediately thereafter with respect to the horrific terrorist attack. And we have spoken substantively about the measures that we take, and I am incredibly devoted to a smooth and successful transition to the success of Governor Noem, should she be confirmed as the Secretary of Homeland Security. And I very much appreciated her focus on the substantive issues that we were discussing.
Secretary Mayorkas, thanks for your time this morning.